This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome back to the Writer Life podcast. Today I'm going to take a look at the Curio Chronicles, and I want to look at the story itself, how it came about, what the background to the story was, and why I actually wrote it. And as you can see by the title of this episode, it's about living life to its fullest. I think when it comes to writing a story, my approach is always to pick a character and then write the story of their life experience. So in order to do that, I look at life today and I write what I see, albeit as a fictional representation. So it does not matter if it's a fantasy or a modern up-to-date story. In a sense, the world may be a fantasy one, but the interactions are real world, which was noticeable in Heirs to the Kingdom and also in Hans Cottage. When it came to the Curio Chronicles, which is set in a more modern day setting, I had the chance to really examine what I see as societal double standards between the generations. And I could take several opinions on how life should be lived and play them off against each other. To do that, I had to really consider a very large wealth of information and then draw natural conclusions from all that I knew and had learned, which I started by looking at how society had changed and how each generation had been raised and what their core beliefs were and how they had been reflected in modern culture today. It's easy as you age to forget those wonderful feelings of being young, wild and free. I feel that as we age, we become somewhat selective in our thoughts and feelings of the days gone by. And it's easy to grow blinkered when it comes to our own behaviour. In many ways, maybe that is due to the fact that as we've aged, the world has changed. And especially with social media, there's a sense that we have to guard our privacy and not admit to our desires out of fear of reprisals. There does appear to be a view that the world is somewhat obsessed with youth. And if you look to Hollywood, it's very much on show. And for a long time, I've pondered as to what that actually does to young minds today. There certainly is a yearning to remain as young at heart as possible, and there's no doubt that millions are spent every year, especially by women, who want to try and preserve their looks for as long as they possibly can. I mean, the negative to all of this is also the vitriol that is spewed out online against those who age, as their looks or weight gain become the topics of heightened conversations. It's kind of a mixture of negatives that can bring a person crashing to earth with devastating consequences. And that drives up anxiety and depression as we fear the criticism of those who slander us and live in fear of being revealed as fake. And so we join in with the masses and point the finger to deflect the attention from ourselves. One subject that has the greatest impact for a negative attack is that, of course, of sexual behaviour. As someone who loves human behaviour, I found the subject of sex quite fascinating. And the one thing I really do love about the subject is all of the contradictions within it. Sex is something that everybody craves. We spend a huge chunk of our lives thinking about it, pursuing it, missing it, and doing it. And as I found out during my time working with people, it's very surprising what actually goes on behind closed doors. Sex is the one thing that will sell a product in advertising. Just cue the hyper-attractive people, scantily dressed, fawning over a product, and you will have instant sales as people rush out to become as desirable as those in the advert. It is also the perfect way to sell your ideal image. Cue famous celebrities in tiny bathing suits or see-through clothing and no underwear on the red carpet. It actually makes me laugh when that gust of wind opens a split skirt or dress and the celebrity reveals a little bit much more than they meant to. Or did they? It appears to me that famous women who have given a sneak peek at their shaved and smooth vaginas on the red carpet while appearing modest and embarrassed are not too worried about the amount of news coverage that they will get the following day. I think if anything, they'll do very well out of the coverage, and it will give their careers a much needed jolt. I've come to the opinion that in life, when it comes to celebrities, there are no accidents. Every aspect of it is tailored towards increasing their public awareness. It is in many ways a new trend, and it's no longer a surprise for a famous star to post a naked picture to Twitter, and it's all done in the name of body positivity. But we all know it's to increase their popularity, and there will be a new movie that features them landing very, very soon. The rich and famous use sex and nudity well, and no matter what you think, that does have an impact on people. The problem is, since the rise of the monster that is social media and data harvesting and mass market advertising, a great deal has been placed in the banned box, and nudity and talk of sexual practices to a degree have been removed from the popular narrative of society, and it's been forced underground. In this day and age, no one really knows just what is going on in society anymore, and yet if you look on the lower pages of the search engine listings, you'll start to see that sexual activities are alive and well and thriving below the surface. And there's a lot more going on than you actually would at first realise. There are kinks, fetishes, affairs, and a whole manner of ways to spice up your marriage, together or with others, and it's flourishing. In 2020, I decided, after 25 years of working as a free counsellor for those who could not afford private counselling, to finally call it a day. Now, it's work that I'm actually very proud of, but with life getting harder and harder and needing time to write more to keep the bills paid, I moved away from what had become a very, very time-consuming part of my life. I work with teenagers, young couples and middle-aged people, and I work mainly in the areas of relationships, abuse and sexual dysfunction. I've learned a huge amount in my time sat with other people as they detail their lives to me and work through their issues with themselves and their partners. And I cannot deny that over the years, I've built up an acceptance of the habits of people that illustrates society, or at least a picture of it that for myself is sex and body positive as a result. It is so easy to sit back and judge people. There is absolutely no effort to pointing the finger and shaming someone. But when you're sat with a young girl who is looking for a reason not to kill herself because of the vile way that she's been treated, because a boy who used her spread all of her details of their sexual relationship to everyone across the internet, you really start to see the world in a very, very different way. Through my time working with people, I began to see very clearly the double standards of society, especially in the area of bullying and shaming, none more so than in relationship to people's sex lives and their choice of partners. I suppose in many ways, because I've seen both sides of the coin and I've built up an understanding of every angle, I'm far more laid back as to what is and what is not considered to be shocking. When you start to see that more hetero couples have anal sex than, say, gay couples, you really do build up a very liberal view of the world around you. Sitting with a couple who deeply love each other, but are afraid to talk of their internal thoughts of sexual practices for the fear of being shamed, you very quickly see how much impact the Puritan worldview of society has, and how actually damaging and corrosive it has become, as it prevents couples from being as open and honest with their partners as maybe they could be. Now, on the flip side of this are those who are indeed unafraid of the societal view, and they own who they truly are, and they have no issues with their thoughts and desires, and they will happily play them out with those who feel they want to be a part of that. The internet has allowed people to talk, and what I see as a positive in the world is that through certain sites, people with like-minded desires have been able to meet up and share their passions. We have a world filled with clubs embracing sexuality, where anything can be played out, be it gay, naturist, kink, swinger, or fetish clubs. Society's been manipulated to shame these places and point the finger, naming them as dens of deviance. But I mean, come on, are they really? No matter what you may think, sex is important to everyone. It is a vastly important aspect of life for all, and lack of it is one of the top causes of sadness, loneliness, and depression. In my time working with couples, I learned very quickly how important it was. It was a subject that came up often as people talked of their loveless marriages due to a life that was so busy they simply did not have the time to connect as a couple as they used to. And the saddest thing of all was these couples really missed it. Both of them would talk of how they felt lost and alone because their partners no longer appeared to want it. And within all of the hurt and all of the pain, it was always clear to me that the one thing they had stopped doing was talking to each other. And because of that, they both felt isolated and alone in their own marriages. Over my time working, I heard a great many tales of life. Some sad, some exciting, and dare I say, some of them very funny indeed. In 2020, when I had finally walked away from counselling and turned my attention to writing, I worked on bringing to an end the series of fantasy stories, Heirs to the Kingdom, to complete what had actually been a 14-year process of work for me. Having completed the series, I wanted to work on something completely different, something that would be the polar opposite of what I'd written to date with the Kingdom. I get a lot of ideas of possible good stories, and I tend at the time to write down my thoughts and file them away. Now, in October of 2020, I was looking for some ideas of what I would write next when I came across something that I'd actually written in 2017, which was a summary of a story of a shy, innocent girl going to university called Abigail. The story had a few notes tagged at the bottom that basically stated this would be her story of self-discovery as she fought to battle her way out from her controlling parents' grip and the opinions of the rural village that she lived in. From the moment I read what was several pages written back in 2017, I knew this would be the next book that I worked on. It was clear to me that here was a vehicle I could use to take all of what I'd learned and heard over the years in the private conversations of a counselling situation, and then write the truth of what I know, happened in life behind closed doors. In many ways, one of the main features that stands out in my mind from the work that I did helping couples or lonely individuals was the hypocrisy of those who surrounded them. One thing that's always eaten away at me is the double standards of society, especially those who sit in judgments of others while acting equally, if not worse, in their own behaviour. Another aspect that also shines brightly to me from those days is how virtue-signalling people had become while hiding their own lack of virtue behind a framework of Puritan, fake morals. It's my experience that those who use manipulation and control tactics to keep others in line tend to actually have the darkest secrets. I've come across a lot of bullies who were then unmasked to show the true sordid details of who they were themselves and all of their deviant lives, and many people who shout offence while hiding their own less than moral behaviour, and at times I found it sickening and absolutely disgraceful. I decided there and then I was going to write Abigail's story and follow her on a journey of discovery as she unmasked all of those who worked to destroy her life. It was meant only ever really to be one book, but what I started was another series of stories, and they would be so different from anything that I'd actually written before that it really inspired me. And what inspired me the most was I was going to write the truth of my experiences, listening to the stories of others. I would actually take everything I knew from years of conversations and work them into Abigail's life. And I knew straight away I would need a very special character to side with Abigail and help her. And what could be better than a young and wild training sex therapist? Enter Jemima Dixon, or as she became more widely known, Birch. The Birch and Dudley combination have been some of the most fun that I've ever had writing. I love these characters, and I love the way that they've evolved. And one of my greatest joys has been the wonderful humour that I've been able to build around them, because I knew from day one that in order to write the truth of modern life, and to actually hold up a mirror to much of today's society, I knew that I had to use humour to lighten the story and give it a seamless flow, which did include, lots of giggles. Birch was always meant to be a giddy and unstable, and by throwing her in her total acceptance of all things sexual and her impulsive acts, combined with a totally honest approach, I think I've created a truly wonderful character to partner with Abby's somewhat tense and anxiety-riddled personality. The two play off each other wonderfully as they bounce their ideas and warp theories off each other. And yet, scratch at the surface, and a whole other layer of deep kindness and inner beauty just flows up from the pair of them. Birch's absolute faith contrasts beautifully with Abby's self-doubt, which has created a very deep dynamic between them both, which becomes the inspiration for their friends. And I cannot deny, having finished this series a good time ago and following Abby's story all the way through, I really do think that I've managed to create a powerful and very deeply beautiful story. No doubt, once all of you have read the whole of the series, I'm sure you will see it in the same light as I do. It became really apparent once I'd finished Abigail's Summer that there was possibility to take both of these characters forward into other tales. And one of the aspects I loved the most about writing them was I had a very real opportunity to show the process of change as young people grew up and moved into the wider world. So I began the second book, and then the third and fourth, and so on. I'd not really wanted to write another series, but I could not help wanting to really go deep with these characters and show the true potential of everyone I'd ever worked with. And to be honest, the Curios were absolutely the perfect vehicle to do this with. I've often discussed with people I work with how we're all fluid on every level of our being, and we all move forward through life and evolve. Hence the line in Abigail's Summer, who we were, who we are now, and who we will become are all very different people. At the end of Abigail's Summer, when I wrote Ronnie's speech, I added this in, and I think that really was the moment when I made the decision to write a second book. In that moment, I knew I would put together the full evolution of Abigail Jenifer Watson and take her on her own journey of self-discovery, from her young idealistic 19-year-old self to her later life. And I would show the readers the full spectrum of a person who was at times an overthinker, but also a deep thinker. And I wrote her process of puzzling things out as she grew up surrounded by the people of her village that, to be honest, would never really truly understand who she actually was as a person. What I began was what I've seen so many times in the many conversations I've had, where the generation gaps really start to show, and how in the modern world we have a series of divides between all of the generations that's built on a complete lack of understanding. And through that, many have resorted to victimization and shame as tools of control. With Birch at the helm of the Curios, she blazed her trail for them, teaching them how to live together and how to be true to themselves, as a combination of her free spirit, pagan beliefs, and her training as a therapist all came into play. And so I slowly aged and opened up each of the curios in what became a tribe-like dynamic in a dysfunctional setting. The greatest thing about writing these stories was I had this huge wealth of information from 25 years of support and conversation as people told me their greatest fears, their deepest regrets, and obviously their sexual desires and practices. I had a huge melting pot to dip into, and even though the series of books has a lot of sexual mishaps, experiences, and desires, I can absolutely assure you it is tame by comparison to the real world. I could have written far more sordid behaviour than I did, but I was keenly aware that those who had read and followed the whole of the Heirs to the Kingdom series would be a little bit more than surprised at what I was offering, especially my older readers. I actually used my 83-year-old father at the time as a barometer of what to expect, and I was not disappointed. He loved the story, but felt the graphic sex parts were actually minimal, if not true life experiences of others, and it was too much and should be edited out. That absolutely convinced me I was leaving them in, because it meant I'd got the balance of the story perfect. My wife and I would discuss the reactions of others, and through their responses we could clearly see which camp the people fitted into, which does sound kind of weird, but we could argue and gauge the readers to see who they identified with. And it was, in a way, we kind of played this game of, would they be a Marjorie, a Marion, or a Curio? It was really fascinating to see how each person individually responded. The whole trick of the series was in the layers of the story. We knew that some people would only see and read it once and possibly never read it again. But actually what I found is that people decided to read them for a second time. And that actually was my hope, because by the time they'd read the book for a second time, in a way they'd become desensitized to any of the sexual content. And it was then that they discovered all of the other small, important moments. And that was when the books really opened up and the true beauty of these books was revealed to them. They actually got to see the full depth of Abby and Birch, and it blew them away. Now, as the writer, I always made sure that after a piece I'd written, which was always slanted towards comedy or some form of sexual event, that I then worked on Abigail's thought process and how she worked out small details that changed her view of the world. And that always led to a conversation alone with Birch. I absolutely believe that the real beauty of these stories is within those moments of both of them alone, usually sat in bed or together in Abby's room, where Abby voices her thoughts and Birch responds with her deep insight. Those moments throughout the whole of the series are the ones that really matter, because they're the real meat and bones of the Curio Chronicles. Those moments are where the true magic happens and Abby starts her process of change from a naive virgin nerd to the adult writer that she's actually going to be. All of my stories have a theme running through them. Heirs to the Kingdom is very much filled with hope, love of the green world, and a fight against oppression. And the Curio Chronicles is no different. I suppose that in the world today, there are a lot of things that I see as corrupted. And so once I developed the Curios and had a really good idea of who they were and who they were going to be, I was then able to take each of their personalities and fashion them in a way that made them unique from each other, and then brought them together in a sort of family situation, and I had them all live together. It was actually quite difficult at first working out who would have what, but the writing was so natural and fluid that soon I found myself unconsciously moulding each character to show off their different traits. Chloe actually became one of my favourite characters to write as the series progressed. I loved her simplistic approach to life. She was a great artist who swore like a trooper and loved sex, and she was unafraid to be open about it. She was from a rough council estate, and she could be crude and vulgar, and educationally she was not the brightest. But that was because for her, she knew from day one she was going to be an artist, and her whole life was to evolve around her pictures. So everything she learned at school for her was pointless. All she needed to know was art history and how to paint, and in that she excelled. The character of Chloe, who was once seen as an enemy of Abby, is actually a means by which Abby stays grounded. In many ways, Chloe develops into a sort of safety net for Abby, through which they grow together to become great friends. Writing Chloe's story was not easy at times, because, as was seen in book 3, even though she acts tough, there's a very hidden depth to Chloe that few can see. And yet she shares it with Abby, such is the strength of the friendship that they've built. She's without doubt a remarkable character, and her life evolves around what most modern teenagers' lives evolve around, which is binge-watching TV, alcohol, social media, and sex. Now Debs, on the other hand, is the complete opposite, although she was actually raised on a council estate by a mother who understood the likes of Marjorie. Ellen works at the care home, and so she interacts daily with the relatives of the rich and the well-to-do, and she understands them better than they actually realise. Now as a result, Ellen raises Debbie to fit in to their world. In a way, she does it to protect her daughter, and in doing so at school she earns the friendship of Abigail, who comes from a very, very well-off family. Debs is a bit of a softie. Her home life is hard. Her father is abusive to her mother, and through that she becomes close to her mum, who to a degree tries to compensate by making her life as good as she possibly can, which involves lots of little treats and lots of cuddles. As a result of all of this, Debbie, who lives in books, as she's had so many bought for her by her mum, grows up in a dreamlike state of fantasy and all things romantic. Although she is pretty naive and innocent, which again makes her a perfect match for Abigail. Debbie's not brave, but once accepted by Birch and Abby, with Abby close by, Debbie becomes very, very good at bluffing her way through some pretty embarrassing situations. And it's all in an attempt to appear braver than she is in front of Birch. Her fake bravery actually leads her to the situation where she ends up giving her virginity to Jimmy and the wild musician from Battered Taco, and she falls deeply in love with him. But actually it's a love that is going to last her a lifetime. Now by comparison, if you look at Edwina is more of the stoic one in the nest. She's more grown up for her age. She's lived a wilder life than she will ever admit, from which she's gained a lot of wisdom. Edwina's life is hackers, gamers, and computer nerds. And so through her many online activities, she's become more than proficient with computers and code. She takes after her mother, who is the real brains behind the restaurant business in Mutton. And like her, Edwina is efficient, organised, and very grounded. Her main role in life is to look out for her haphazard sister Chloe, who she's very close to. Edwina, to a degree, is the only voice of reason in Chloe's life until Birch and Abby appear on the scene. Edwina has a good head for figures and business, something she's learned working side by side with her mother, as her mother built up the restaurant business in town. And so it makes complete sense to her to follow in her mother's footsteps and set up her own business and work alone. She's very much the calm one of the group, and more of a watcher than I think the group realise. She has a strong inner confidence and has no fear of jumping in at the deep end and getting involved with a big project. Edwina is calm and relaxed about most things, bar one. She's secretly in love with a guy named Luke. He was the guy who gave her first ever coding lessons, aged just 15, and the mere mention of his name will send her into a full-on blushing, embarrassment and panic. Now Anthony is the deepest of them all. He cares deeply about many things, but he's also the most damaged, having had a life of bullying and victimization. His scars are all internal, and he hides them well, but they manifest in him as tics and behavioural quirks, and they're yet another cause of ridicule for him. He's gay, and he struggles to accept it. His father has disowned him and sees him as an embarrassment, which means he's separated from the only person who's ever really accepted him, which is his mother. In the village, life is very hard, and he teams up with his mother's friend Delphine to open up a business as a hairdresser. Now, when it comes to hair, he is without doubt an artist, and it's through his ability to stun and thrill women with his work on their hair that he actually finds his little tiny space of creative peace in order to survive the cruelness of the rest of the village. Anthony is very intelligent. He's highly skilled with sarcasm, which has been his only defense tool in life, and is filled with this huge depth of deeply loving feelings. Abby and Birch befriend him at first as he tags on to the group, and without realising, Abby teaches him how to become his own true self, through which he finally starts to admit his sexuality, not only to himself, but to his business partner and also his friends. Now, for Anthony, it's a huge moment in his life, and it bonds him to Abby in a deep friendship that will last their lifetime. They grow so close, he appears more like a brother to her, which you will see as the series progresses. Anthony lives for his work, which actually allows me to weave him in and out of the story of the girls, and his fast wit and moments of absolute dramatic panic make for some very funny moments throughout all of the series. Abby adores him, as does Chloe, and there are some very special and some very beautiful moments between all three of them within this series of stories. Now, there's no doubt Birch is the driving force of the group, if not the most insane. She's liberated, accepting of pretty much all behaviour, and loves nothing better than a good challenge, one that usually leads Abby into panic. She's lively and giddy and filled with love, and has a streak of kindness that blows people away. In her mind, it's simple logic, and yet she stuns people with great acts of kindness. Birch is technically brilliant. Her mind races at an alarming speed as she pulls everything apart in her brain and then rebuilds it, and it's done with such precision and speed she astounds everybody around her. Birch has no fear of the unknown. She is without doubt the most curious of the curios, whose genius is also a part of her madness. She never fears confrontation, as she fights with the only weapon she deems fit, the facts of the truth, and in doing so, very, very few can beat her. She is tall, blonde, very attractive, and utterly insane at times. And yet, as unbelievable as she may actually appear, I've known quite a few people just like her in my own life. She is a very rare kind of person, one of a kind, and she is a fierce defender of justice, which makes her the most dangerous person in the village. And Marjorie knows that from day one. The love of her life is Abby, and it goes far deeper than the readers, I think, actually realise. And her sole aim from the very moment she meets Abby is to protect her and guide her, through which, over time, Abby starts to understand who she truly is. Birch is a massively important piece of the puzzle when it comes to Abby figuring out her life, especially considering that Birch is the only person Abby knows who will stand up to her father. Birch's fast wit, lined with a very real truth, can be cutting and devastating, especially when in defence of Abby, and she understands Abby in ways no other ever will do so. And it's through those quiet moments alone that the wisdom of the very streetwise Birch illuminates Abby's life. Birch's biggest attribute, and possibly the most powerful aspect of her, is she's not actually fake. She's true to herself and has no need to lie, and she judges no one she meets. Her biggest drawback is if you piss her off or you hurt Abby, you'll find you have got an enemy you will never conquer, and you will finally get to witness the dark side of her northern hostility. All of the Curios have a part to play in Abby's life, but never forget that this is actually Abigail's story, and it's her journey of self-discovery. Understanding Abby is not always easy. She's lived a very oppressive life, as her father ruled with a cold and iron hand. And you can be under no illusions, she may come from a very rich family of privilege, but she's suffered in ways many people would not understand. I completely understand Abby perfectly. I've worked with a good few like her. So when writing her in a dialogue, I'm more than aware of where she's coming from. The best way to understand Abby is she's made up of many lost and broken pieces of who she's been told who she should be, which are in a constant conflict with who she actually wants to be. Her meeting with Birch is possibly the most single important moment of her life, because from the moment they meet, Birch sees her for who she truly is and naturally comes to her aid. It may be hard to see, but out of all the group, which actually includes Birch, Abby is actually the most intelligent one of all. Her mind is sharp and her instincts are keen, but her greatest weakness is she's far too trusting, which is a result of her upbringing and her desperate need to fit in. Abby is prone to outbursts of people-pleasing in order to survive, and through that she adapts and is good at appearing as the perfect country-living, well-mannered girl. She has a very caring personality and hates confrontation, and due to that a good few try to take advantage of her, which Birch understands and plays the role of protector well. Abby does not just need protecting from others. At times she actually needs protecting from herself, because her biggest drawback is she's prone to overthinking, through which she falls into some very destructive and negative patterns. Birch is her perfect companion, because as Abby slips into anxiety and panic, which can happen quite often, Birch has that ability to reach into her and calm her down in ways others cannot do. Chloe, to a degree, learns this skill over time from Birch and also becomes a very fierce protector of Abby. Now when it comes to Abby, you cannot underestimate the damage that her father has done to her. She is riddled with insecurity, is filled with self-doubt and constantly seeks validation. And yet through her fears, she discovers that she can see the world in ways that others do not. Her overthinking, combined with her love of all things Gothic, combines to help her become a very imaginative and very creative writer. And it is in this area of her writing that she excels the most. Abby's books captivate people simply because she approaches life from many different angles, and that shows in her work. It's within her books that her true intelligence shines out of her, something Birch picks up on very quickly at uni. Birch is academically brilliant, and yet she stands in awe of Abby's mind, especially whilst at uni, where Abby reads her one of her first short stories. And it's because of Birch's joy at hearing it that Abby is encouraged to expand it into a full-size novel, which actually becomes her first In Her Hands of Death series of vampire novels, and the launchpad for her career as an author. Abby is the most complex of all of the characters, which is why when I first started to write the book Abigail Summer, I made what for me was the brave decision to write the story from Abby's point of view, something of a style I'd never actually written before. I had to ask the very real question, could I really get into the mindset of a female as a male, and then write a true account of her life? Now luckily, I've had years of experience talking to females similar to Abby, and I also have a wife who I can actually check in with and get some good advice. My wife really was vastly important to this series, as she would sit and point out small, subtle things that I needed to write differently. And through her I managed to get as close to a female point of view as I possibly could. It was not always easy, and maybe it is not perfect, but I do feel, having spoken to quite a few female readers now, I've got about as close as I was ever going to get. which was a huge learning curve for me at the time, and I feel maybe has helped me improve to give a better portrayal of other female characters in my future books. Now, as I stated earlier, Abby is a very complex person, and as I wrote this series of books, I became very aware that I had to write these stories in as simple a style as possible, so that the story would appeal to the widest audience that I could get. And so I did a lot of editing once the story was complete to keep the story as simple and easy to read as it could be, whilst not betraying all of the traits of all of the characters. It was a huge learning curve for me as the author, but one I feel has served me well for the future, because I feel to have mass appeal, the simplicity makes for the better reading for everyone, and it will help keep people engaged to get the full enjoyment of all of these stories. From day one, I wanted a really different scenario for the meeting of Birch and Deadly. I knew it would be at the university and at the dorm room door, but I needed something that would stand out to show the uniqueness and the difference of both of these characters. Now, understanding that Birch would be from a Wiccan background and she would be studying psychology and sexual therapies, it was not that hard a leap to understand that she would be really body positive. This is an area I've done a lot of work in. Most people I've met in my life felt the pressure to conform to what I see as unreal body standards of society today. We live in a world where celebrity culture rules pretty much everything, and the advertising community and fashion industry has set some very difficult to achieve standards for most ordinary people, and it's had a very negative impact on women in particular. If you consider how social media and the mainstream media are being set up, where everything is designed to sell, it does not take very long to see how airbrushed and computer-enhanced images, combined with extremely thin models within fashion, paint a narrative for all women that is wrong and unattainable. Abby has a very negative body image, and she sees herself as dull and not very attractive. And so I knew instantly the one vehicle that would scream body positivity and confidence for Birch, which also played into her pagan belief system, would actually be nudity. Nudity is a fascinating topic because it's used in so many different ways to either set an unrealistic standard, enhance sexualization of an image, or more importantly, be used as a tool of shame. There's no coincidence that religion used nudity as a primary source of shame and control, because we do live in a world where nudity is the number one method used to sell products and highlight glamour. A revealing plunging neckline, long bare legs are used to sell, but also used to show people how inferior that they are. Because it is the number one tool of sales, it is also discouraged, because the primary use of the naked skin, especially linked with a young attractive body, feeds resentment and body negativity when used in advertising, and becomes the driver that will get a young person to buy a product and increase the sales. The most positive thing about nudity is it allows people to accept themselves and feel good about their body, and when that happens, it destroys the power of the media. If you can stand naked in your own skin and be happy and confident, then the liberation you feel and the confidence that you will gain will utterly remove the power of the media to control you. It is the number one reason why the media will do everything it can to shame and humiliate people who like to be naked. And most of society has fallen into this trap of believing that to be naked and to love your body is actually a bad thing. I mean, can you imagine that? Media has taught people to hate their own skin. By simply writing Birch as a naturist and having her answer the door wearing no clothes, she sets an example that it does not just change Abby, it also opens the eyes of the reader. It sends a positive message to everyone about how to break the chains of the media and body negativity. And so throughout all of the series, I've made a point of normalizing naturism and showing it for the non-sexual natural lifestyle it has become. It is amazing to think that since I wrote these books, Sunbathing naked in the garden has become the most popular British summer trend, as more and more people have grown an interest in living a naked, free life at home. A lot of that has been attributed to the COVID lockdowns, where people felt trapped and caged. Without realising, as I sat back and wrote in 2020, I was absolutely in sync with society as a whole, and aware of what was to become Britain's fastest growing new trend of 2021 and 2022. In many ways it gives me hope, because it makes me think that maybe society is starting to wake up and realising that for years they've been hoodwinked, and that actually loving your body is far more important than makeup, clothing, shoes, or other millions of different things that nudity is used to sell. Okay, now I will look at what could possibly be seen as the most controversial aspect of the Curio books, which is the graphic sex. In Heirs to the Kingdom, I managed to find a way of adding aspects of people's sex life using a writing style that would imply a certain narrative, which was sexy but not descriptive. In truth, I'm not keen on graphic sex pieces, and I've never been a fan of the sorts of words that I've come across in other books, especially in the area of describing sexual body parts. I do feel at times some books appear to have a sort of crude 70s porn movie vibe in the way that the passages are actually written, and I wanted to try and avoid that. I knew graphic sex scenes would not sit well with some of my readers, but I also know that the young especially, it's actually a really important aspect of their life. I spent a lot of time pondering over what was and what was not acceptable to myself within my own books. But I really wanted to write a story that was real and gritty, and as real life as possible. And never forget, I've been privileged enough to have been able to talk to people in great detail about their desires, their dreams, and their real life sex acts. So I built up a very good idea of what actually goes on behind closed doors. I was never going to write sex for the sake of sex. I wanted to record Abby's life as true a representation of a female student's life as I possibly could. And with a lot of information behind me due to some of my counselling, I knew I could to a degree create a narrative that took into account enough to paint a much fuller picture than I actually wrote. And I wanted to do that in as sensitive a way as possible. So okay, writing about masturbation and threesomes was never going to be easy. And I decided early on that any sex in the books would be written from the point of view of Abby's thoughts and her inner dialogue. It all had to be written from either what she was seeing or what she was experiencing. And with that in mind, I set out to write using as few of the commonly used crude sex words as possible. It sounds sort of weird, but what I wanted to write was a sex scene that was to a degree milder than most, but graphic enough so that the readers would have a deeper understanding of the whole process of thought through Abby's mind. It is a big part of life, especially for the younger generations, and so I knew it would be included, but I ran the risk of shocking and offending some of my older readers, who came from a generation where sex was something people did not talk about. In all honesty, I intended to pitch the books at an age bracket of early 20s to around mid-50s, which to a degree has actually become the age range of the audience of these books. To date, a couple of female readers within that age range have actually informed me that by comparison to other books, The Curios is actually quite tame, so I feel I did, to a degree, get the pitch right. The second big area that I knew could court some controversy was the humour. In order to understand the jokes within these stories, you have to understand where as the author I come from. I grew up in the 1970s. I grew up with Carry On films and reading Tom Sharp books, both of which were good at weaving a comedy narrative around sexual connotation. And to be quite honest, the physical act of sex can at times really be quite funny. And so for myself, it was easy to find a humorous angle to write from. I'm more than aware of the current modern culture that we live in today, where everyone is offended. But as a fierce defender of free speech, I had no intentions of pandering to a culture that, to be honest, needs to chill out a bit and maybe get laid and relax about things. Today, people go too far and find offence in everything. And my view has always been, if you do not like what I write, then it's simple. Do not read it. I have no time for today's modern cancel culture. I had every intention from word one of writing something that showed real life, the good, the bad and the ugly. And I feel that is what I have done. And again, if you don't like it, that's fine by me. Go read something you do like and toss my book in the bin. I write for me, and then I share it with others who like what I write. And that will not change anytime soon. And today, from what I've been told, these books are pretty true in their representation of parts of our modern culture, and many have said they could have gone further, to which I responded, I feel I get the message across, which was always my intent, and I'm happy with that. Now, in regard to the term curio, I'll write this, or I'll say this. As someone who has studied and read a huge amount of human behaviour and the many facets of people's personalities, I see a full human in the sense of a cake sliced into equal portions. For argument's sake, let's just say each person could be represented as a cake cut into 20 even slices, and each slice is one very important aspect of that person. The whole cake is the whole person, and one slice of that cake is the sexual persona of that person. Now, it is a very, very important slice, and I would say, yeah, it is. But is it the most important slice? In this, I'd have to disagree, because I believe that every single slice is as important as the other, because together they make the person as a whole. In my eyes, it is the complete person that matters the most, not a single aspect of them. And so wearing a badge that is just for one aspect of who you are, in my mind, is contrary and damaging to the whole of the persona. I do not think people should reduce themselves simply to who they sleep with. I actually think they are worth far more than who they fuck. And I find it sad that some people cannot see they're so much more than simply their sex partner choice. I feel it diminishes all of the other wonderful qualities of the people and the facets of their own personalities and identity. And it saddens me to see people so proudly waving a flag that states, "This is who I am," when actually it's just one aspect of them as a whole. I have worked with so many who have made their whole life about who they sleep with. And they made it their whole identity, when I could clearly see that they were so much more than that. And I found it sad that they had so much more to offer, and yet were completely blinded to it because of the narratives that they'd been taught by those who meant to control them through their activism. Curio is a whole person, a person unafraid to own their own truth, and is filled with a curious mind as to who they are and who they will become, and in awe of so many things that their lives are, and they're filled with endless possibilities as they look at everything and decide which part of those things they will adopt to fulfill their life. Curios have no fear to question and experiment, and their life is one long exploration of self-discovery. A curio is a complete person, a confident person, and a person who does not fear life and all that it has to offer. Do not do yourself the disservice of lessening the person that you truly are. Be you and appreciate each other. There's a lot more to come in the life of Abigail, and with 3 books out and the characters well established, I'm looking forward to being able to share the rest of Abby's complicated life. Now, as the series continues, I will show the process of how she ages and how some parts of her change and some remain the same, which will be true for all of the Curios. The next book will take another huge step forward for all of the characters as the tempo and the attitudes of the characters begin to change. But fear not, because there is a lot of humour and madness as the gang of girls pass through their 20s and head towards their later life. As with all of the books that I write, if you enjoy it, please do not be quiet about it. Authors need talkers, so tell people, share your enjoyment, and look me up on social media and like, share and compliment on the post that I put up, so that I can actually let others know that if my books are enjoyed and loved, others will be able to see that. My thanks as always to those who support my writing by reading, because it really is so deeply appreciated. As to the Kingdom, the Curio Chronicles, Rise of the Raven, Hans Cottage and The Countess of Darkness are all available in print and digital formats from all online book suppliers for purchase or for download. My thanks to all of those who have listened today, and I hope you'll keep turning the pages, reading the lines and expanding all of your minds. If you really enjoy this podcast, or if there's other things you want to know about the books that I write, please head down below to the comments. If you haven't already done it, give the video a like, subscribe to the podcast, and add a comment about what you would like to hear me talk about. Ask questions. If there's a particular part of a book that you really, really love and you want to share that, then please put it in the comments. My thank you to all of you for listening in today, and I'll be back next week with another podcast about another aspect of a writer's life. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.